After the failure of many predictions made in the literature of the Worldwide Church of God about the timing as well as the manner of fulfillment of end-time prophecies, many, if not most of the men who were in the ministry back in those days, developed an aversion to the need for a deeper study into the subject of prophecies, which has resulted now, in our day and time, in the stagnation of prophetic understanding in many of the groups that have survived the Worldwide Church of God. Now, this is very unfortunate because we now find ourselves at the point when all of the dominoes of prophetic events have been aligned and are now waiting for the time that God has appointed for them to begin cascading. For the first one to be kicked over and then everything as it wraps around, how the dominoes fall. That's where we are. It's even more unfortunate that because of the reluctance of many to reassess their prophetic understanding, too many of God's people seem oblivious to know exactly how close we are to God's appointed time. Because we're definitely closer than we were a week ago, a month ago, a year ago, 10 years ago, and so on. Of all times to be oblivious, now is not the time. Jesus makes it very plain back here in the Olivet prophecy in Matthew chapter 24, as well as Luke 21, but he makes it very plain that his disciples at the close of the age should be paying close attention to the prophecies regarding this time, the time of the end. Now, yes, we don't have to understand every prophecy exactly, but we need to be mindful of it. Otherwise, we're really not doing what he tells us to do here, Matthew 24, verse 15. Therefore, he states, when you see, he's talking to his disciples because they're the ones who ask the question, when, what are we to look for? When you see the abomination of desolation, or the abomination that causes desolation, the armies of the beast that surround Jerusalem, spoken of by Daniel the prophet. He draws our attention to Daniel. Spoken of by Daniel the prophet. When you see what he wrote, well, how would we know? How would we recognize it if we didn't know it, if we hadn't studied it, if we're not looking into it? Standing in the holy place, then he makes the caution, whoever reads, let him understand. Who reads what? Reads Daniel. Reads all the prophets as far as that's concerned. It's only the ones who read it, who study it, are going to understand it. That's what he says. Now, over in Luke 21, in a parallel account of the Olivet prophecy, Luke 21, and down here in verse 36, as he's gone through and laid out things to watch for, he says, watch therefore. Watch. That is, look, see. When you see, watch, and pray always that you may be counted worthy to escape all these things that he lays out in the Olivet prophecy that will come to pass and to stand before the Son of Man. So in order to pray that you're not going to be affected by what is to come, you need to know what it is that you don't want to suffer. And how you do that? Prophecy. The ability to follow Jesus' admonitions to watch and pray always about escaping the time of trial that is going to come upon the entire earth, to try all of the earth before God's kingdom is established over all nations, requires the study of prophecy. So it is an important subject. There are people who, it's not that important, it's not that. Well, then explain to me why Jesus says you need to know what Daniel said. Yes, it is important for his disciples to know these things. According to prophecy, one of the major areas to watch involves the primary event, the catalyst that will begin the cascading of the dominoes of all the major end-time prophecies. And today, I would like to focus primarily on that particular event, the catalyst, and the ramifications of that particular event. First of all, let's go back to Genesis chapter 3. Gary did this last week, but I want to go back and note something here. We must remember that when God wants us to fully grasp a specific topic, he emphasizes it in both the beginning as well as the conclusion of the Holy Scriptures and the Bible, which he does in reference to Satan's power of deception. Here in chapter 3 of Genesis, verse 1. Now, the serpent was more cunning than any beast of the field which the eternal God had made. Well, he didn't make the serpent as the serpent. He made the serpent as a glorious spirit being. The serpent, became the adversary after a total perversion of his thinking. All right, but of all the creatures that God has created, the serpent more cunning, more devious, more deceptive than anything else. Let's skip down to verse 13 and note, after all that happened here and what happened with the woman and of Eve, the eternal God said to the woman, "What is this that you've done?" And the woman said, "The serpent deceived me, and I ate." The serpent deceived me. Our introduction to the devil is to a being that has powerful deceptive abilities, who can twist what God says and make humans believe the distorted information that he deceives them into believing. God reminds us how far-reaching the devil's power is here in the final book of the Bible, in Revelation chapter 12 and verse 7. Again, Gary went through this last week, but let's look at it again. Here in Revelation 12, verse 7, "And war broke out in heaven. Michael and his angels fought with the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought. But they," that is, the dragon and his angels, the demons, "did not prevail, nor was a place found for them in heaven any longer. So the great dragon was cast out, that serpent of old, called the devil and Satan, who deceives the whole world," the entirety of the world. Everyone who is in this cosmos is deceived, but not just everyone. Even the animals are deceived. You know, they don't operate the way God initially created them back in the Garden of Eden there. You know, but nonetheless, he deceives the whole world, and this is specific to human beings. "He was cast to the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. Then," John says, "I heard a loud voice saying in heaven, now that this has been done, now that this war is over, now that he's been cast down, now salvation and strength and the kingdom of our God and the power of his Christ have come. For the accuser of our brethren who accused them before our God day and night has been cast down." He says, now finally we can come to the time of salvation, the time when the first fruits are caught up and made immortal, the time when the kingdom of God will be established. This is what the catalyst is, the casting down of the devil. This is what starts it all, according to what we read here. We read on then, down here in verse 13, it says, "Now when the dragon saw that he had been cast to the earth, he persecuted," or he went in pursuit of, the Complete Jewish Bible has, he went in pursuit of the woman who gave birth to the male child. Again, we know and understand that to be pursuit of the Jews in the land of Israel. We've covered that many times before, as well as the woman who is the woman of the spiritual, that is the church. Not just physical Judah, but spiritual Judah he goes in pursuit of. Now, this section of the book of Revelation, here in Revelation chapter 12, falls prophetically immediately prior to the beginning of the time of great tribulation, which Christ mentions back in Matthew chapter 24, the Olivet prophecy. Not only has the devil deceived the whole world since the time of Eve, it will continue that deception and even intensify that deception once it is cast down at the end. You know, evil men and seducers are going to wax or grow worse and worse, Paul tells us, as the age progresses. And it has definitely gotten to that point today. Can't look anywhere without seeing that. Everything God says has come to pass. God knew what he was talking about, and we see it all around us if we just look into the book. We study prophecy, and sure enough, God is right on target. He hasn't missed a thing. How far will the dragon go with its deceit? How far? Jesus tells us in the Olivet prophecy, again here in Matthew chapter 24, Matthew 24 He tells us here in the Olivet Prophecy, after exhorting us to read the prophecies of Daniel, let's pick it up again in verse 15. Therefore, when you see the abomination that causes desolation, spoken of by Daniel the prophet, standing in the holy place. Now, again, we know that to be Jerusalem. That's what he's talking about. Whoever reads, let him understand. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let him who is on the housetop not go down to take anything out of his house. Let him who is in the field not go back to get his clothes. There's going to be something, there's got to be some real energetic movement at this point in time. You don't have time to goof off. No time to procrastinate. Decisions have to be made. You have to know what you're going to do when you see that. You can't wait until you see it and deliberate. What am I going to do? No, he says, you don't have time for this. Let him who is in the field not go back to get his clothes, but woe to those who are pregnant and to those who are nursing babies in those days. They're in Judea. That's specifically what he's talking about, because what is going to befall the land of Israel. And pray that your flight may not be in winter or on the Sabbath. So we are told very clearly here in this passage that the elect of God who are in Judea, in that part of the world at that time, will flee into the mountains at the appearance of the armies that come and surround the city of Jerusalem. Now, going on in verse 21, I'll read from the Complete Jewish Bible because this brings it out more clearly. For there will be trouble then, worse than there has ever been from the beginning of the world. The word here is cosmos. That means the current arrangement of civilization. And that arrangement originally started in the Garden of Eden with the deception of Eve. But then that world was crushed. And so when he's talking here about from the beginning of the cosmos, I think he's talking about from Noah forward, because there was a horrible thing that happened in Noah's day. All but 8 people out of billions were killed. So pretty substantial destruction, a horrible time. But from the time of Noah till now, says there will be nothing like it again. What we're going to see take place at the close of the age. Indeed, if the length of this time had not been limited, no one would survive. God has limited it. Okay? All of the numbers, the times that he tells us, 1290, 1260, 3.5 years times 42 months, all of these none of these are going to be shortened. God's already shortened it before he gives us this information. It says that if he hadn't limited it, no one would survive. But for the sake of those who have been chosen, its length will be limited. These verses summarize the reason the church must flee and remain hidden from that point until the sounding of the 7th trumpet. Only after the church flees is there any of the prophesied distress and tribulation specific to the church and to Jerusalem. Because people, we got to go through this. Israel went through this plague and that plague, and so yeah, we're going through a horrible time, difficult time, but you know what? We're not being pulled out like what happened on October the 7th, and babies having their heads crushed, people being decapitated with shovels and so forth and so on. That went with the Hamas. You know, we're not going through that right now. There was a taste of what's going to happen right there on October the 7th. You know, but we're not going through these horrible times, and we're not going to experience a lot of horrible plagues before that time. You know, Israel had to go through 3 of them. Ezekiel tells us they had to go through 3 plagues because they wouldn't give up their idolatry. That's the reason they went through those. Now, if we're committing idolatry, we better get rid of it. Anything we're doing that is Laodicean, we haven't repented of, we better be doing it, or we're going to find ourselves in that kind of boat, in that kind of distress, in that kind of tribulation. But no, nothing major is going to happen to us before that time. I don't find it in the outline of prophecy in the book of Revelation. I find it happens after this. It's not till the devil is cast down that he goes in pursuit of the woman. Let's keep everything as the Bible tells us it is. The first outpouring is on Jerusalem and the area of Judea at the beginning of the 1260 days. The most horrifying time of distress, that Jesus addresses in the Olivet prophecy, no time like it before, okay, that will be the fulfillment of the trumpet and bowl plagues, which will begin during and after the latter part of the 3.5 years. That's when the worst of it will be. Now, we come to a very interesting warning here in verse 23 that pertains to the time immediately preceding the appearance of the abomination of desolation and the time when the disciples of Christ are told to flee. Verse 23, again, I'll continue in the Complete Jewish Bible. At that time, if someone says to you, "Look, here's the Messiah," or "There he is," don't believe him. For there will appear false messiahs and false prophets performing great miracles, amazing things, so as to fool, or as the New King James has, deceive even the chosen if possible. These are going to be incredible things. Messianic pretenders and counterfeits, we are warned, will appear. That's what the Messiah says. And the Messiah warns his disciples to not allow themselves to be deceived by these tools of the devil, because that's what they are. The reason for the coming of these impostors is to deceive the masses of humanity. Now, until now, what Jesus warns us of, there will be false messiahs and false prophets performing great miracles, amazing things. I haven't seen that happen. But there will be a false messiah and a false prophet that will do amazing things. Hasn't happened yet. It's going to happen. And it's going to happen before long. Going on in verse 25, New Living Translation, "See," Jesus says, "I have warned you about this ahead of time. I've given you warning. So you better be understanding prophecy if you want to know what you need to do." Yes, your spiritual life is what's most important. If you're doing what spiritually you need to do, that's great. But you still need to understand some prophecy, to understand these major things. I've warned you about this ahead of time. So, if someone tells you, "Look, the Messiah is out in the desert," don't, he says. Don't bother to go and look. Or they say, "Look, he is hiding here." Don't believe it. I've warned you before. He warns us right here. At the time the church flees, there will be a man who claims to be the Messiah. But in reality, he will be an impostor. He will not be the Messiah. The devil, though, will succeed in deceiving the peoples and nations of this world into believing the Messiah has been on the earth. He's been here, but he's been in hiding. He's hidden from view until the time that he is planning to reveal himself. We're warned, in other words, what the Messiah tells us here. We are warned that the false Messiah is going to come out of obscurity. He's not going to be someone known. He's not going to be the Pope. The Pope is known. The cardinals elect the Pope. Every Pope has been known. People studying the popes are going to realize can never be Jesus Christ for the sins of that group. At any rate, he will come out of obscurity. That's what we're told here. So if they say, "Oh, no, he's over here, over there," don't believe it. Verse 27, Complete Jewish Bible goes on, "For when the Son of Man does come, it will be like lightning that flashes out of the east and fills the sky to the western horizon." The time of the Son of Man, the Messiah, the time that he is prophesied to first appear at the close of the age, is at the sounding of the seventh trumpet, and not before. As far as the sign in the world, that's the first time, sounding of the seventh trumpet. He will appear in the clouds, that's what we're told, the clouds of the sky. He will appear as flaming light, whose splendor is so great that we're told even the sun disappears in the brilliance of the Messiah. And as the brilliant flaming light, he will be seen by every person on earth. because from east to west he will go around the whole of the earth. Because Revelation 1:7 tells us every eye will see him. Now, whether the blind's eyes are open to see it, or whether there's a miracle that they see incredible brightness, they're not going to be able to make him out because he's so bright you can't look at him. Verse 28, for wherever the carcass is, there the eagles will be gathered together. All this is saying is when he comes, his disciples will be gathered together in their immortal bodies to meet him in the air. And once they meet him, they will follow him as he disappears. His light disappears. He goes totally back into the spirit realm, and the immortal saints follow him to the third heaven before the throne of the Father. Verse 29, immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, the moon will not give its light, the stars will fall from heaven, and the powers of the heavens, or the heavenly bodies, will be shaken. Now he's talking here about the sixth seal. When the sixth seal is opened, all of this, including the earthquake, occurs. The tribulation of those days that's mentioned here in verse 29, though, refers to the period that the remnant of the church, not in the place of refuge, must reject the deception of the false Messiah. They must reject it. Once the heavenly signs occur, the trumpet plagues begin, and with them, the time of such horrible tribulation that, according to what we read in Daniel 12:1, according to what we read in Matthew 24 about that time, no one would survive it if God has not already limited the length of that time. Now, we must be careful not to overlook this warning that Christ gives his disciples about a false Messiah who will appear on the scene at the very close of the age. Keeping this warning in mind will help us to have a better grasp, to comprehend more fully the individual who will ultimately come on the world scene and head the beast power. But we need to keep this warning, because he said, I've warned you ahead of time, you better be aware. There's going to be somebody who comes to claim to be me. Don't believe it for a second. Now, some of the groups formed by God's people after the destruction of the Worldwide Church of God Corporation have continued to believe, and in some cases continue to teach, that the beast will be a man much like Adolf Hitler, who will rise to prominence over some arrangement of 10 nations in Europe. If so, they got a lot of time left. You looked at the nations in Europe today? You know, it's turning into an Islamic cesspool. But at any rate, does the Bible indicate the beast will arrive on the world scene in the same manner as Adolf Hitler did? No, it doesn't. It does not whatsoever. That was formed, as Gary said last week, this was formed because Mr. Armstrong experienced World War II, saw concentration camps, and so he read the King James, the captivity. No, it's exile. It's the exile of the people. You read the book of Hosea. The northern 10 tribes were exiled from the land of Israel. Now, we are in captivity to a system today, but as far as being in captivity in concentration camps waiting for the Europeans to come over and load us in ships and take us to Europe and put us in concentration camps and then begin gassing us or whatever, forget it. It ain't going to happen. That was a scenario that he came up with based upon what he saw going on, thinking that Christ was going to return before too much time after World War II. Because we had an article after Hitler's alive down in Argentina. You know, he's going to come back and, no. But that's why, that teaching is still there. And people are still hanging whatever on it. They will not reassess it. Then they need to. No, the Pope is not going to be the Antichrist. He is an Antichrist, but this individual comes out of obscurity. Anyway, it's a real problem that some of these perceptions are still held by members of the body of Christ today because of the reluctance to reassess what was taught years ago. The fact that it might be different from what the Holy Scriptures demand. In fact, it is quite different than what the Holy Scriptures demand. Now, from the beginning of human experience, the devil has been involved in a scheme of keeping the world in confusion and deceived to the truth of God. When the serpent learned from God, back in the chapter 3 of Genesis, that he would send a Messiah to reconcile humanity to himself, the devil proceeded from that moment on to begin counterfeiting everything that God revealed about his plan. Counterfeited it all. In the pre-flood world, in fact, let's go back to Genesis chapter 10. In the pre-flood world, Cain began a false religion, claiming that he was the Messiah. That was on the other side of the flood. After the flood, at the beginning of the time of repopulating the earth, the devil once again found someone who could be used to carry on a counterfeit religion. Here in Genesis 10, verse 8, Cush begot Nimrod. He began to be a mighty one, or a mighty Gibor, that is, a tyrant. He became a tyrant. On the earth, he was a mighty hunter. Yes, he was a mighty hunter, a hunter of men. This is the kind of hunter he was before the eternal. Therefore it is said, like Nimrod, the mighty hunter before the eternal. That is, he put himself before or in place of God. And the beginning of his kingdom was Babel, or Babylon, as some of the other translations bring out. Babel. The beginning of Nimrod's kingdom was Babylon. As a tyrant, he elevated himself before God in the eyes of the people. As a mighty hunter, as it brings out here, he hunted down and murdered all of those who refused to his claim of preeminence. If anybody objected, if anybody resisted, he hunted them down to get rid of them. Just like what goes on today in this world. It's still the same thing, still the same devil. Just changes identity, just changes people, that's all. The people he works with. Once he had instilled sufficient fear in those that were living in the area of Babylon after the flood, we find that Nimrod then set out to build a world-ruling empire. That's found here in chapter 11, verse 1. It says, "Now the whole earth had one language and one speech. And it came to pass, as they journeyed from the east, that they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there. There in the Middle East, basically the Tigris-Euphrates area. Then they said one to one another, 'Come, let us make bricks and bake them thoroughly.' They had brick for stone, they had asphalt for mortar, and they said, 'Come, let us build ourselves a city, and a tower whose top is in the heavens. Let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be scattered abroad over the face of the whole earth.' But the Eternal came down to see the city and the tower which the sons of men had built. The Eternal said, 'Indeed, the people are one, and they all have one language.' And this is what they begin to do. As soon as they can communicate throughout the world, just like they can today. Not one language as far as, English I think is the number one language, followed by one of the dialects of Chinese. But the one language is all in those zeros and ones. The entire world has one language. They all have computers, and the computers all operate on that system. And so, again, indeed, the people are one. They have one language, and this is what they begin to do. Now, nothing that they propose to do will be withheld from them. AI, okay? Terminator showed us. This is not good. This is not good. Verse 7, "Come, let us go down," the Eternal said, "and there confuse their language that they may not understand one another's speech." So the Eternal scattered them abroad from there over the face of all the earth, and they ceased building the city. Therefore its name is called Babel, because there the Eternal confused the language of all the earth. And from there the Eternal scattered them abroad over the face of all the earth. So we find that Nimrod indeed made a name for himself. In doing so, he became identified with the name that is associated with what God was required to do because of Nimrod's rebellion. And that was, God was required to cause confusion of languages, Babylon of languages. And so Nimrod is directly associated with Babylon. Nimrod established his kingdom. He is said to have married his mother Semiramis, from which, of course, the artwork, whatever you would call it, of the Madonna and Child. You know, there's only 5 billion of those paintings in Italy. If you ever go to Italy, every time you walk through, it's all Madonna and Child. Everybody in Italy, apparently, painted a Madonna and Child. It's Nimrod and Semiramis. That's who it is. It predates the birth of Christ. But at any rate, after his death, Semiramis claimed that Nimrod was immortal and that her son Tammuz was actually the reincarnation of Nimrod. She claimed a full-grown evergreen tree sprang up overnight from a dead stump, which symbolized the springing forth to new life of the dead Nimrod. On each anniversary of his birth, she claimed that Nimrod would visit the evergreen tree and leave gifts around the evergreen tree. What is now the date of December 25th on our calendars was the birthday of Tammuz, not the Messiah. Semiramis became the Babylonian queen of heaven, and Nimrod, under various names, became the divine son of heaven. You see how well the devil has been able to counterfeit everything? And he's counterfeited it before, in many cases, something happened. And so all this about Christ, and this was all out of paganism, and the Christians just adopted what was in paganism. No, paganism was started by the devil because he knew what God was going to do. Enough prophecies were there for him to do what he did. Throughout time, Nimrod became known as the sun god, or Baal, or Baal as we call him. The devil used the first man who ruled over Babylon as a false messiah. Nimrod was a false messiah. The vast majority of those who claim to be Christians in the world today show that they have already accepted that false Messiah when they keep the days and customs associated with that false Messiah. Remember, the Apostle Paul referred to, a number, but he referred to this Nimrod as what? Another Jesus, not the Messiah, another Savior. Not the Savior, not the Yeshua, the Joshua. The Babylonian system, which was created by Nimrod and Semiramis, has remained throughout time. The system has confused all of humanity as to the identity of the true Messiah. Nimrod and all of his spin-off deities has been worshipped as a god ever since the first Babylon. The beast at the end simply comes claiming that he is the very one that men think that they have been worshiping since the rise of the false church. They think they're worshiping Jesus Christ, but they're not. They're worshiping another Jesus, one who does not require them to keep the commandments, to keep the Sabbath. They can keep whatever pagan holiday they want and associate his name with it. That's who they worship, not the true Messiah. When the beast is revealed, he will immediately be worshiped. Let's go back to Revelation chapter 13. Notice this. Revelation chapter 13. And we'll pick up here in the middle of verse 3. Here in verse 3, it says, "And the whole earth followed after the beast in amazement." Going on in verse 4, "So they worshiped the dragon who gave authority to the beast, and they worshiped the beast, saying, 'Who is like the beast?'" Now they worshiped the dragon who gave authority because the dragon will possess the beast. They're going to worship him within the beast. They say, who is like the beast? Who's able to make war with him? And he was given a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies, or arrogant blasphemies, the complete Jewish Bible has. And he was given authority to continue, or he was allowed to exercise authority, the New Revised Standard brings out, for 42 months. Then he opened his mouth in blasphemy against God, to blaspheme his name, his tabernacle, and those who dwell in heaven. It was granted to him to make war with the saints and to overcome them. And authority was given him over every tribe, tongue, and nation. All who dwell on the earth will worship him, whose names have not been written in the book of life of the Lamb, slain from the foundation of the world. So we find here that he is permitted to exert his power for 42 months, which is equal to 1,260 days, which is equal to 3.5 times or 3.5 years. That's where he exercises his authority over Jerusalem, because he will continue. He actually has power longer than 1,260 days, but he doesn't have it over Jerusalem except for 1,260 days. Remember, Jesus says that the only ones who will be able to recognize the deception of the false Messiah are the elect. The Apostle Paul, in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, the Apostle Paul connects the false Messiah to the close of the age here in this chapter, 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, and verse 1. And he writes, "Now, brethren," remember, he thought that Christ was going to return in his lifetime until we get to, his second book to Timothy, and then he realizes, nope, he's not going to live that long. Okay, but until sometime about then, he says, "Now, brethren, concerning the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ and our gathering together to him," which, Paul's very familiar with that, based upon the Olivet prophecy, what the apostles were told. "We ask you not to be soon shaken in mind or troubled or unsettled or alarmed," other translations have, "either by spirit," which some translations look at this as prophecy, some prophecy, the spirit of prophecy, you see, or by some prophecy, or by word or spoken message, or by letter, as if from us, that is, from Paul and from Timothy, as though the day of Christ had come. Don't get too shaken up, because there's some things you need to be aware of. "Let no one deceive you by any means." And again, we were warned last week in the sermon about not being deceived and not deceiving ourselves. Let no one deceive you by any means, for that day will not come unless the falling away comes first. Hideous translation there. Hideous translation. The New English translation has, "will not come until the rebellion comes." The Revised English Bible, "will not come before the final rebellion against God and the man of sin," or the man of lawlessness, is revealed. "And the son of perdition," or the man doomed to destruction, as several other translations bring out, because that's what perdition is. Perdition is destruction. The man doomed to destruction. He's doomed to destruction because of prophecy. He's been prophesied that he would come and he would be destroyed. So there's doom, just like Judas was doomed because of prophecy. One of the 12 had to betray Christ. That one, the betrayer, was doomed to be destroyed. Now, the beginning of the cascading of the dominoes of prophetic events cannot occur, according to what Paul writes here, cannot occur prior to the fulfillment of this major event designated in the Greek as the apostasia. That's not quite the way it should be pronounced, but that's what we always call it. So the apostasia. Okay, the apostasia has to come first, according to Paul. Now, although many translations connect this word apostasia, which is used only twice in all of the New Testament, they connect that to falling away from the faith. Despite that, there are several translations, I read a couple of them, there's still more, that associate the meaning of apostasia with related classical Greek words. The noun, apostasis. Apostasis means revolt or rebellion. Okay? The noun apostates. We've heard of apostates and so forth. It means rebel. Rebel. An apostate is a rebel. And an apostasis is a rebellion. Since Paul does not directly here connect the apostasia to any recorded prophecy, he doesn't. It seems because the prophecy hadn't been written yet. Okay, so he can't connect it. He probably knew about it. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to say this. You see, he knew about things that he couldn't relate. 2 Corinthians chapter 12. You'll find there, he was given a lot of different revelations, but there were things he couldn't say. He couldn't pass it on. He wasn't allowed to, because that was going to be John's responsibility. And so he had to have known this based upon what he saw when he wasn't sure if he was in body or just what, or in a vision when he went to the third heaven. All right, so he learned about this apostasia. Now, as we saw earlier, the Apostle John later records that this prophecy concerns the rebellion of Satan the devil. That's the apostasia. That's the rebellion. It's not until John relates it in the book of Revelation. And that rebellion is what causes war in heaven. That is the rebellion. War in heaven. After being cast down to the earth, the devil, knowing that his time is short, according to Revelation 12:12, possesses the man who becomes the false prophet and performs lying wonders through that man by calling fire down from heaven, just as Elijah did. Elijah's the only individual in the Bible ever called fire down. May fire come down and consume you. He's the only one. Well, here we're warned in Revelation chapter 13 that there's this false prophet's going to do the same thing. He's going to call fire down from heaven. Now, yes, it is a miraculous event, but it's not done under God's power, okay, as we'll go on to see. But he will call down fire from heaven in order to garner the attention of humanity. Because humanity, they're impressed with miracles. Just like the Pharisees, the religious leaders in Christ's time. Oh, just show us a miracle. Herod, I would like to see a miracle. That's what they were after. And then, after he does gain the attention of humanity, the false prophet then proclaims the coming of the false Messiah, the man of sin, the beast. He is there to set the stage for the coming of the false Messiah. Verse 4 goes on here in 2 Thessalonians 2. The man of sin, the son of perdition, who opposes and exalts himself above all that is called God or that is worshipped. Or as the New American Standard says, he exalts himself above every so-called God or object of worship, so that he sits as God in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. Now, the phrase sits as God in the temple of God refers to the manner in which the man of sin, also known as the beast or the Antichrist, it's how he exalts himself. It does not refer to the location from which he rules. There is not going to be a temple built before this happens. There is a temple Ezekiel tells us about in the latter part of Ezekiel, but it's not around until Christ returns. Not going to be a third temple, because this is not talking about a temple. It's talking about the manner in which the false Messiah comes claiming to support his claims. And again, this is clarified. You want to know what verse 4 means? Go back to Ezekiel chapter 28. Ezekiel 28. And down here in verse 2. Ezekiel 28, verse 2. Here, God says, Son of man, which was Ezekiel, say to the prince of Tyre. Now, the prince of Tyre is the man who will be possessed by Satan. The king of Tyre, later in the chapter, is Satan the devil. Okay? The king, he's got the prince. The prince here of Tyre is the man of sin, son of perdition. Say to the prince of Tyre, thus says the Lord God, because your heart is lifted up, and you say, I am God. That's what the King James has. It's correct. It is singular. It's just L there. Because you say you are God. I sit in the seat of God. This is what this individual will say, the Prince of Tyre. In the midst of the seas, that is, among all the nations, I sit as God. Yet, the reality is, God says, you are a man and not God, though you set your heart as the heart of God. Or Tanakh, even though you deemed your mind equal to God. So again, the Prince of Tyre represents the man of sin, possessed by Satan the devil. He will claim to be the supreme ruler in the midst of the seas over all nations. In the temple of God here in 2 Thessalonians 4, okay, what does the temple of God mean? It is a reference to the temple in heaven, where God sits on his throne as supreme ruler over all the spirit and physical realms. He is supreme over everything. And that's where he is in his temple in heaven. Revelation makes that very clear. Just as God sits on his throne in his temple as supreme ruler, so the man of sin will sit in the palace that he establishes for himself in Jerusalem for 3.5 years. Daniel 11:45 tells us about that. He will establish his palace between the seas, between the Dead Sea and the Mediterranean, which is there in Jerusalem, during which time he will claim to be the Messiah, Jesus Christ. That's what he's going to claim. All right, moving on here in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, let's go to verse 5. Do you, Paul asked those in Thessalonica to whom he wrote the letter originally, do you not remember that when I was still with you, I told you these things? So he went into great detail when he was there in Thessalonica and teaching the people. He went through all of these prophecies. And why did he do that if prophecy is not relevant? You see, here's an apostle, and he spent a lot of time talking about prophecy so the people could understand it. Yes, prophecy is important, regardless of what some people want to say. Don't you remember? I told you these things. Verse 6, the Revised English Bible goes on. You know, too, about the restraining power which ensures that he will be revealed only at his appointed time. You see, God has complete control over everything. No question about it. He has total and complete control. Paul reminds us that every event God has prophesied will be fulfilled at exactly the time that God has appointed. Not before and not after. It will be at the exact time. Verse 7 goes on in the Revised English Bible. For already the secret forces of wickedness are at work. From the moment of the first human sin, Satan and the wicked spirits under his control, the demons, have been at work, influencing humanity to disobey God's law. That's happened ever since then. Yes, secret forces of wickedness are at work. It's in the spirit realm. It's these angels that have perverted minds that are doing all of this wickedness. You know, the Apostle Paul even warns us back in Ephesians chapter 6 about verse 12. Our struggle is not against human foes. It's not something on the physical level. That's not where our struggle is. Our struggle is with those in the spirit realm. It's against the rulers and the principalities and so forth. The rulers of the darkness of this world. That's where, the spiritual forces of wickedness, that's what we are having our struggle with. Now, in addition to the spiritual destruction of humanity, the unseen forces that are mentioned here crave to destroy all physical life. They want everything destroyed. From the time Satan usurped authority to rule the earth, took it away from Adam when Adam surrendered and disobeyed God, Satan has been restrained. He's been held back. He's been restrained from destroying all life. He would love to do it, but he's been restrained. God's placed borders up, will not let him go any further than a certain distance, as first 2 chapters of the book of Job show us very clearly. But Satan has been limited by God for what he can do. In fact, until the time of the 6th trumpet, God has set bounds so that he will allow the devil to prematurely kill no more than 1/4 of humanity. He will let him kill 1/4 of humanity. That's what goes on every year, whether it's wars, diseases, whatever that the devil brings on. But 1/4, 25%. But once that 7th trumpet or the 6th trumpet sounds, in an hour, he's going to destroy 1/3, which is a much greater number than 25%. He's going to be allowed to do that. But again, there are restraining powers. Going on here in verse 7, only he who now restrains or holds back, or as Goodspeed has, is now holding it in check, will do so until he is taken, or until he steps, other translations, until he steps out of the way. Now, we are told in the book of Daniel, chapter 10, may as well hold your place there. Let's go over to Daniel chapter 10. But we know that from what is written here in Daniel 10, that God uses the archangels, Gabriel and Michael, to restrain Satan, to prevent Satan from doing anything that could disrupt any prophecy declared by God. That is, of course, until God's appointed time comes. When that event arrives, the time for that event, then God lets go. All right, here in verse 13 of Daniel 10, but the prince, Gabriel speaking to Daniel, is explaining things to Daniel about what's going on. He says, but the prince of the kingdom of Persia withstood me 21 days. Who is that prince of Persia who would have the ability to withstand an archangel? Okay, that's right. It's the one who was the archangel there in Ezekiel chapter 28 who was cast down, the covering cherub. All right, and behold, Michael, one of the chief princes, that is an archangel, came to help me, Gabriel says, for I had been left alone there with the kings of Persia. And let's skip verse 20. And now I must return to fight with the prince of Persia. And when I have gone forth, indeed the prince of Greece will come. And of course, these are the spirits behind these world leaders. But I will tell you what is noted in the scripture of truth. No one upholds me against these except Michael, your prince. So the secret forces of wickedness, back here in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, they're anxiously awaiting the time when they can be unleashed on the world. But that can't happen until whichever. It's probably Michael, since he's the one that ends up, in heaven making war with Satan and his demons. It's Michael, apparently, that is holding him back. Michael is the one who's restraining him from acting before the time that God has appointed. Now, verses 6 and 7 here in 2 Thessalonians 2 make it very clear that Satan is completely under God's control. He's appointed Michael and Gabriel to keep Satan restrained within the bounds that God has set for the devil. For the past, how many years? Quite a few now, but for the past several years in particular, virtually everything on earth throughout most of the nations of the world, everything has been going Satan's way. It's hard to find anything that's not going his way, other than maybe Elon Musk, and not even all of Elon Musk, what he does, but at any rate, he has met, through this time, very little resistance. People talk big, they do nothing. We have a whole bunch of people, some of them are females, but the others, apparently have been castrated because big talk and no action, okay? We see that. We see that going on today. So there's limited resistance. You might have some verbal resistance, but that's been it. However, blatantly belligerent, lying, self-serving, slimy political leaders pushing for a one-world government, They've created rampant inflation, 30-something trillion dollar debt here. You know, they have created an unbelievable amount of unemployment. You know, they are, whatever they do, I mean, they've treated the people with no respect whatsoever. Oh, we represent you. Well, if you do, go drown yourself in the midst of the sea, you know, because you need a millstone about your neck for what you've done for the little people. Okay? You want to do something for me, that would be it. Because that's what's going to happen to you, because you're lying. You're lying. Every time you open your mouth, you're lying. But at any rate, because of these and many other things, the majority of people today, not just here in this country, but in nations around the world, they're getting fed up with government overreach and the totalitarian direction of Western politicians. People have, you know, they're, at least throughout the Western world, I'm not going to say China, but people at least throughout the Western world are no longer tolerating being pushed to accept perversion. They're not tolerating it. People are finally saying enough is enough. They're not tolerating the breakdown of law enforcement, open borders, and the insanity of transgenderism. They're beginning to resist. We see that. There is resistance that has begun to arise. I mean, the people of Italy, the Netherlands, Argentina, you know, they have all joined a few other Western nations by electing conservative leaders who oppose totalitarianism. If you listen to the, I can't understand him, but I can listen to the translation of Milei, whatever, from Argentina. He went to the WEF. Whew! You know, it's amazing they didn't assassinate him. But at any rate, there is resistance. This growing resistance movement is counter to Satan's success and could be the catalyst that provokes Satan into making war by fighting against Michael in heaven. Since it is God, according to what Daniel writes in Daniel chapter 2, I think it's verse 21, that God is the one who removes and raises up leaders of nations, Satan would what? He would blame God for using Michael to restrict the progression of his wickedness, because he knows that he's given a lot of latitude at the end for deception, but something is in the way here. Why am I getting this resistance? And the big key, of course, is the U.S., because if you can get this, you got it. You know, you get the U.S., you got your one world government. That's what they're looking at, and they're not. Things aren't going as smoothly as they were. But let's go on here in 2 Thessalonians 2, verse 8. And then the lawless one will be revealed. Well, that is when the one restraining steps out of the way. The lawless one will be revealed, whom the Lord will consume with the breath of his mouth and destroy with the brightness of his coming, or annihilate by the radiance of his presence, the Revised English Bible has. So when the appointed time for the coming of the man of sin finally arrives, Satan will not be restrained from ascending to heaven to make war with Michael. Nor will he be restrained after being defeated in that war and cast out of heaven. He will not be prevented from possessing the man of sin, the son of perdition, who will be destroyed by the coming of Jesus Christ, as verse 8 brings out. Going on in verse 9, the coming of the lawless one is according to the working or the activity, some translations have, according to the activity of Satan. So again, he's tied into it. This is who's being resisted. This is who's being restrained. Satan is being restrained with all power, signs, and lying wonders. This is what the devil is got in his basket of goodies that he's going to use. Satan will take over the mind. He's going to take possession of the man of sin. Once in possession of that man's mind, Satan will perform wonders in order to deceive mankind into believing that the man of sin is none other than God's Messiah. These miracles that he will work will be of the same magnitude as here in Revelation 13 as the signs worked by the false prophet. Hold your place in 2 Thessalonians 2. But here in Revelation 13, verse 13, regarding the false prophet, he performs great signs so that he even makes fire come down from heaven on the earth in the sight of men, and he deceives those who dwell on the earth by those signs which he was granted to do on behalf of the beast. The New Revised Standard has. All right, so these are going to be incredible wonders, and it's going to catch the attention of humanity. And they're going to believe something. This is not just science fiction here. What's going on? All right, 2 Thessalonians 2, verse 10. I'll read from the Complete Jewish Bible. He, that is Satan, will enable him, the man of sin. Satan will enable the man of sin to deceive in all kinds of wicked ways those who are headed for destruction or who are perishing because they would not receive the love of the truth. Or as the Phillips translation, because they have refused to love the truth that could have saved them. Again, Satan is the master of deception, as we saw earlier in Genesis 3, Revelation chapter 12. He is the master of deception. Being in control of the mind of the man of sin, Satan will use every tool of deceit in his power to hypnotize humanity into rejecting the message of God's messengers. He will make sure that humanity will reject the message presented to the nations by the two witnesses. Remember Matthew 24:14. I won't go there, but Matthew 24:14, Jesus tells us that this gospel of the kingdom must be preached into all the world as a witness to all nations, and then the end will come. That's the two witnesses. Nobody else is going to be able to do that. And then after they're put to death, of course, you have the angel preaching the everlasting gospel after the seventh trumpet's been sounded. But it also tells us in Revelation chapter 11 about the two witnesses, how they have power to shut up heaven so that it doesn't rain during the time of their testimony. All right, verse 11, 2 Thessalonians 2, verse 11. And for this reason, God will send them strong delusion. What reason? Because they don't love the truth. They love the truth. They're going to study the truth. They're going to spend time with the truth. They're going to believe the truth. But they don't love it. It's not that precious. And because it's not precious, they're going to be deceived. That's the people in the world. Hopefully none of God's people. He's going to send them a strong delusion that they should believe the lie. Because the carnal mind, as we were told back in Romans 8:7, because the carnal mind is hostile toward God. Okay? That's a given. It's hostile toward God. Because of that, humanity will reject the witness of the two witnesses, God's two prophets, who will testify that the beast is an imposter. Not who he claims to be. Two witnesses are going to be 3.5 years saying, this guy's a fraud, this guy's an imposter, this guy's a fraud. Well, I don't care what miracles you think he's doing, he's a fraud. They're going to be there all the time. They're going to be talking about this plague coming and that plague coming. But they're going to be warning the world, this guy is a fraud. But they're not going to believe them. In fact, due to the hatred that mankind will have for God's two messengers, the nations were told, was it Revelation 11 about verses 11, 12, 13? They're going to turn on the two witnesses. They're going to rejoice once the beast kills the two witnesses. It says they're going to send presents to one another. They're so grateful to finally to get rid of these guys. That's how deceptive the devil is going to be with the minds of people. Here are guys who actually represent God, and they are destroyed. Now, in referring to what he inspired the prophet Isaiah to record, Jesus clearly stated that mankind does not have eyes to see. Remember in Matthew chapter 13? Blessed are you, my disciples, because you have eyes to see. All right, but the world, No, mankind doesn't have eyes to see. Humanity has been blinded to the truth. That blindness is going to be intensified as the age comes to a close when God sends strong delusion. That's what it says here. He sends strong delusion. How? By allowing Satan to amplify the power of his deception. Remember, going back to the book of Job, Satan is what? He's a servant of God. God's going to send strong delusion, but he's going to use Satan to do it. Because nobody can deceive any better than Satan. He's the best there is at deception. And again, the lie here, that they should believe the lie that will be believed by those who will refuse to love the truth, is that the man of sin is the Messiah, exactly what the Messiah, Christ, warned his disciples to avoid, as we reviewed earlier in Matthew 24. You know, I've warned you before it's happened. I've told you, you better pay attention to this. It's because Christ's disciples have His Spirit, the power that emanates from God. It's because they have that Spirit and have been given eyes to see that they are the only ones who will not be deceived. But if they're not using that Spirit, better be using it. Better be loving the truth. When you love the truth, you're going to do everything to draw upon that essence of God, that power. Now, how exactly will the beast substantiate his claim of being God, of being Messiah? After all, the Bible's chock full of scriptures that give details of events associated with the return and reign of the Messiah. Keeping in mind that the whole world will be under a strong delusion and that Satan has a way of twisting things to make people believe lies, just as he did with Eve, the false Messiah can pick and choose certain prophecies and claim that I fulfilled them. You know, this is proof that I am who I say I am, despite the two witnesses saying, no, he's not. No, he's not. Okay? He could point to many of the millennial prophecies regarding the peace and prosperity that the Messiah's reign is to bring to the world, and then claim that his policies are fulfilling all of those prophecies. Abundance, prosperity, unbelievable is going to take place once he's in position. He will be a master of deception in expanding his control over the nations. In Daniel, hold your place in 2 Thessalonians, but in Daniel chapter 8 here, verse 23, Complete Jewish Bible has, in the latter part of their reign, when the evildoers have become as evil as possible, there will arise an arrogant king skilled in intrigue. Going on in verse 24, the New International, he will become very strong, but not by his own power. That is, by Satan's power. That's the power he's going to have. He will cause astounding devastation, will succeed in whatever he does. He will destroy mighty men, or he will work havoc on the mighty nations and the holy people. Verse 25 from the Revised English Bible, by cunning and deceit. He will succeed in his designs. He will devise great schemes and work havoc on many when they least expect it. He will challenge even the Prince of Princes and be broken, but by no human hand. This is what the devil is able to do through this individual. This is what the beast does. We could go to Isaiah chapter 10, verse 14. That's where the beast brags about how he's been able to seize like a nest full of eggs. He's been able to go in and take all the eggs out from under the hens. And the hens don't even make a peep. He's going to be able to take the wealth of the nations to himself because everyone is deceived. He'll gather all the earth without opposition because all will be under the delusion of thinking he is Messiah. Now, the mark that he will require all people to receive in order to buy and sell will provide the basis for his control over them, as well as establishing a great economic prosperity among the nations. It's going to happen, according to Revelation, because you go back to Revelation In the aftermath of the destruction of Babylon in Revelation 18, beginning about verse 13, you can go through here and read about the merchants of the earth and all of the abundance and everything, the wonderful things they have and how they're able to move it back and forth over the earth through the massive ships, because it talks about the shipmasters and all of the people. The merchants of the earth have been made wealthy by all of the trading. The shipbuilders and the ship owners, they are made wealthy. They're become rich beyond imagination because of all of the goods that they send back and forth over the oceans. And they're all crying because Babylon has been destroyed, and there goes the source of their wealth. They're still rather carnal at that point in time. But we find that there's this phenomenal prosperity, but it comes from total control of all the wealth, the mark of the beast. For 2.5 years, the millennium will seem to have begun. And then after 2.5 years comes the sixth seal, and then the trumpets. And then all that prosperity will be destroyed through the plagues of God. Now, there are a number of other prophecies which the beast could use by twisting them to fit his actions, such as claiming that the wicked, who the Messiah is prophesied to destroy, are those who refuse to accept him as Messiah, which the beast will decree are, who's not accepting me? Oh, well, it's the Jews over here. Oh, it's this Church of God. They're not accepting me, so I'm going to have to put them to death. He can twist things, and people will believe it. Any prophecies that he fails to fulfill, if people bring that, of course the two witnesses are going to say, well, you didn't do this, you didn't do that. So there's going to be resistance all the time, but he can't do anything to them because God won't allow it till the very end. But if any fail, then he's going to say, look, I'm God. I can cancel them. We don't have to fulfill those prophecies. I determined we don't need to. We made enough success without getting into those things. So by both the miracles the devil works through him and his deceptive interpretations of prophecies related to the coming of the Messiah, all of the Western world, all of the Western Christian world, will be convinced that he is indeed the Messiah, when in fact he's an impostor, a false Messiah. Now that we understand the casting down of Satan, that it begins the cascading of the line of dominoes of prophetic events, the obvious question is, how soon after that event, when he's cast down, will the beast be revealed? How soon? Same hour, same day, same week, same month? How much time from his casting down till he's revealed? Well, we know that the false prophet must appear before the beast because Elijah is prophesied to precede the Messiah. But no length of time between the two of them is given anywhere in the Scripture. This isn't there. We also know that the church is to flee from Judea by the beginning of the 1290 days, at which time Jerusalem will be surrounded by armies. We know that. That event will occur, that is, Jerusalem surrounded by armies, will occur 45 days after the animal sacrifices have been started, which when that happens, they started, begins the 1335 days of Daniel 12:12. All of these things occur before the mark of the beast is decreed. And we know that how? Zephaniah. Zephaniah chapter 2 and verse 1. Zephaniah 2, verse 1. Here God says, "Gather yourselves together. Yes, gather together, O undesirable nation." That can be tied to Matthew 24, verses 9 and 10, which is a reference to the disciples of Christ, to his church. Okay? That's the undesirable nation. The spiritual nation of Israel is the undesirable. Gather together before, when? Before the decree is issued. Notice there's two gatherings before the decree is issued. There's a gather to flee to Judea, or to go to Judea. There's a gathering to flee out of Judea. God doesn't stutter. There's a reason why he has two gatherings together here and tells us that it's all before the decree is issued. Or the day passes like chaff, before the Eternal's fierce anger comes upon you, before the day of the Eternal's anger comes upon you. The indication here is that the mark of the beast will be decreed once the Messiah, that is the false Messiah, takes up residence in Jerusalem and requires all the nations to worship him. Now, there are two passages that reveal the length of time that the beast will reside in Jerusalem. Revelation 11, latter part of verse 2. Revelation 11, latter part of verse 2. It says, "And they," that is the nations, "they will tread the holy city underfoot for 42 months. All right? That's exactly the amount of time that Luke 21, verse 24 tells us in the Olivet prophecy, where Jesus says, "And they will fall." Luke 21, 24, "They will fall by the edge of the sword and be led away captive into all nations, and Jerusalem will be trampled by Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled." The times are 3.5 times. The beast will reside in Jerusalem for 3.5 times, 3.5 years, which is equal to the 42 months we read earlier in Revelation chapter 13, equal to 1,260 days. We know that the beast, as the king of the north in Daniel chapter 11, will lead an army into the land of Israel, which will surround Jerusalem for 30 days. And that he will leave Jerusalem, and he will go to the Jezreel Valley after the seventh trumpet is sounded, where he will remain for an undisclosed amount of time, or length of time, while the bowl plagues are being poured out. That's where he's got to be according to the timeline in Revelation. These pre-Jerusalem and post-Jerusalem residence events of the beast, that is, show that the false Messiah will be on the world scene for longer than 1,290 days. How many days prior to leading an army into the land of Israel is simply unknown. So we are never told at what point the false Messiah will be revealed after being cast down from heaven. But there will be no doubt when he is revealed. And the false prophet will probably designate the time when he does his false miracles. Well, brethren, I hope we can stay alert to the incredible power of deception possessed by Satan the devil. All of the dominoes, let's go over to Romans chapter 13, but all of the dominoes of the end-time prophetic events are aligned, and they're ready to begin cascading at the moment God's appointed time is reached. And that appointed time will plunge the world into the most horrific period of suffering and delusion it has ever experienced this side of the flood. Therefore, let's take heart to this admonition that the Messiah gives us through the writing of the Apostle Paul here in Romans 13, verse 11, which I'll read from the Complete Jewish Bible. "Besides all this," things that he said before here, "you know at what point of history we stand, we today do. So it is high time for you to rouse yourselves from sleep." Or the New Living Translation simply says, "It's time for you to wake up, for the final deliverance is nearer than when we first came to trust. The night is almost over, and the day is almost